This is our fifth lecture, evaluation of the bureaucracy. And we're going to look at it from a number of perspectives. And we're going to start off with how the public views the bureaucracy. In a lot of ways, the general view of American bureaucrats is negative. There's too much red tape, there's too much waste, there's too much inefficiency. Bureaucrats are underworked and overpaid. But the specific attitude is that the public's personal dealings make it much more favorable, because when they do have to deal with a bureaucrat, more often than not, it's resolved to their satisfaction. Now, there's also a segment of the population that believes that bureaucrats are too lazy, yet at the same time they're also too powerful and ineffective. And then there's a third view that bureaucrats are often viewed as scapegoats by politicians when things go wrong. An example of that would be Bush's FEMA director, who screwed up the response to Hurricane Katrina in 2006. Turns out, upon further investigation, that though he bore and should have borne some of the blame, he wasn't the only one who should have been heavily criticized by the public. Now, the criticisms of the bureaucracy are many, but the biggest one is, of course, excessive red tape. Excessive red tape means that, again, your dynamic in your bureaucracy says that you have to make sure that points A, B, C, D, E, and F, and G are all taken care of, or are all considered, when we would look at it and go, why do you need steps B, C, D, and E? Because it looks as if they're just useless steps that you're just putting in there to make more work for everybody else, and at the same time make your job more secure. And there could be a little bit of truth to that. Now, secondly, there are the agency conflicts. Some of these are just the type that boggle the mind. We spend millions of dollars through the Agriculture Department administering tobacco subsidies. Now, are we used to? We administer tobacco companies to farmers in Kentucky and Virginia and North Carolina and various other places where tobacco is a big crop. And yet at the same time, we spend millions of dollars on behalf of the Surgeon General warning the public not to smoke. Amazing. There's agency duplication, so that numerous agencies are responsible for drug enforcement, from DEA to the Department of Justice to you name it. ICE is part of that equation, and we have to ask ourselves, why do so many agencies have a finger that is in on dealing with the same problem? We also believe that there's excessive waste. The Defense Department procurement scandals, which, you know, the $10,000 toilet seat on the B-1B bomber, things like that. We spend money without regard or without thinking that it's taxpayer money. It's our money that's being used. And there's also what we call excessive growth. Now, it's true that the number of federal employees has not risen dramatically in the last 50 years. It has risen, but again, not dramatically. But we do know that what has happened is that the federal government has shifted much of its work to state and local governments, anywhere from 5 to 8 million jobs. And another 8 to 10 million jobs are dependent upon the largesse of the federal government. So when one considers the private sector jobs that are dependent, we're looking now at 15 to 20 million people who rely on federal government work for their livelihoods. Now, on the other hand, Congress has dismantled some agencies. The Interstate Commerce Commission is no longer around. It privatized Amtrak. It reduced the scope and funding for agencies such as the National Endowment for the Arts. Was threatened this last election to bring the funding down for NPR and for PBS. Republicans have furthermore stated that they would like to dismantle the education and energy departments. The fact of the matter is, Reagan talked about that in the early 1980s. And what happens is that the client groups begin agitating against this through Congress and through the agencies themselves. And ultimately, after 4 years, Reagan kind of gave up on that dream. Bush, in 2001, also indicated that he was in favor of getting rid of the Department of Energy. And of course, again, that didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. Now, some more criticisms of the bureaucracy are things like a lack of a good incentive system. Treat bureaucrats like private sector employees. Give them the incentives to make decisions. But the problem is that the modus operandi of bureaucracies is maintain the status quo. Don't rock the boat with bold initiatives. Why bother? There's a parlor game called Bureaucracy, and there's only one rule. The first one to move loses. We teach our bureaucrats to fear change. And due to the essentially permanent job tenure, bureaucrats are part of a permanent government that, in a lot of ways, becomes unresponsive to the public. They become unresponsive to their bosses, who they know will only be there 4 to 8 years when they're going to be in somewhat the same position for 25 to 30. Now, the flip side to this is that the defense of bureaucracy is there's some good points here. It may sound illogical, but to correct red tape, well, that means that there's more regulations that are passed, which means more red tape. And we have to stand back and look at red tape from a different perspective. It is used to ensure fairness and impartiality. Prior to 1883, when the Pendleton Act materialized as the way to get a job, it wasn't about fairness and impartiality. It was about who you were politically connected to. Now, to reduce agency conflicts and duplication would require Congress to set priorities. This is difficult for members of Congress to do because of the constituencies that support programs within the state or districts. You cut a program in other states, but don't cut programs in mine. That was why the base closing commission was a minefield for so many congressmen and senators, because any loss of jobs in their district would jeopardize their reelection. To reduce waste would require more regulations, therefore, again, more red tape. To reduce excessive growth of bureaucracies, Congress would have to set priorities. And we have seen, for political reasons, that is difficult for members of Congress to do. Now, some agencies have in fact shrunk. For instance, the Postal Service is actually on the verge of shrinking again, especially if they're able to reduce or eliminate Saturday service. The Defense Department grows and shrinks with whatever is going on globally. A few agencies, as we say, have been eliminated. The ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, was eliminated. CAB, the Civil Aeronautics Board, which set airline prices and seemed to benefit only the labor market and the companies that ran airlines, and the public got shafted. And after CAB was eliminated, the market intruded, and it's now cheaper to fly than it is to do almost anything else. And it's cheaper to fly now than it was in the 1960s and 1970s. Now, the public is also insistent and inconsistent that the government do things, but it gripes when government grows. We want our water clean, we want our food safe to eat, but somehow that's supposed to be done without new safety inspectors and new food inspectors, and you can't have it both ways. And we have to say that compared to other nations, Greece, France, the U.S. bureaucracy is fairly efficient. So this wraps up our look at bureaucracy. Believe it or not, it's over with. And the next thing we'll be looking at is the judicial branch. And that will finish up our look at government institutions.